Hey guys, this is my Trifles analysis. I chose the prompt for comparing the symbols in the story that I found to the major themes that seemed important to me. I just wanted to point something out. Trifles by definition means all the little things. For me, that means all the little things in Minnie's life that ended up to the murder of her husband. I just find it ironic that Miss Glassbell chose Trifles as the title of her play. There are many symbols in the story, and I chose the most important ones that stuck out to me that related to the major themes of the story. Everything from the beginning of Minnie's marriage to the death of her husband corresponds to at least one of the major themes in the play. Some examples of the symbols in the story that stood out the most to me were the singing canary, the bird, the cage, the telephone, the rope, the quilt, and the items in the house. Now keep in mind the singing canary and the bird are completely two different things. They will be differentiated in further slides. The first symbol that I wanted to introduce was the singing canary. Minnie used to sing when she was younger. She sang in the choir, but for some reason, when she got married to John, she stopped. The fact that John is the reason she stopped singing can be related to one of the major things in the play, male superiority. The fact that John made her stop seems a little harsh just because he found it obnoxious. Throughout the entire production, the author hints about how women don't have equal rights and how the men have supremacy over their wives. Keep in mind, this play was written in the early 1900s. Women didn't even have the right to vote yet. They had to ask their husband if they can go to the grocery store to get things that they need for the family. I'm so glad it's not like that anymore. Now the bird is completely different from the singing canary. The bird is a symbol of Minnie herself. She's the little person in the entire story, and after John wrung the neck of her bird, it's almost as if he tried to kill her soul. This was the only emotion that she felt inside the house. Miss Hale and Miss Peters both agree that John was a very bland person that almost never expressed how he felt towards Minnie in a positive way. The discussion between the county attorney and Miss Hale says it all. You mean that they didn't get on very well? No, I don't mean anything, but I don't think a place to be any cheerfuler for John's right being in it. The cage is another important symbol. If the bird was Minnie, that would only leave the house to be her enclosure, just as the cage was the bird's enclosure. She never socialized with anyone outside of the house. It was simply her and her husband who disregarded her emotions. He practically pretended that she wasn't there. After Minnie brought the canary into the house, he killed it because it was loud and obnoxious. This can be tied to the second major theme of the play, women's lack of rights. John didn't want Minnie to talk to anyone out of the house. When his friend comes to ask about the party line, his friend already knows what he's going to say. John's actions toward the telephone suggest that solitude is another major theme for this play. This would be the third one. By saying that he wasn't interested in the fact that people talk too much anyways, can lead the audience to believe that he didn't want contact with the outside world, and it was fine with him that his wife didn't have that privilege either. From the evidence provided through the text, it seems as if he tried to help her to not flourish like she should. The quote from the critical articles on page 226 supports this theory. Her isolation, the gloom of her surroundings, and her husband's dissipation slowly drove her to the brink of insanity. The rope was another major symbol in the story. The rope that Minnie used to strangle her husband was in the formation of a noose. This clearly symbolizes how the women of the early 1900s were strangled due to their lack of rights. Miss Glassbell convinces the audience that the men are the lower intellectual humans when compared to the women of the story. The quote on page 228 in the critical article supports this theory. In other words, by depicting the men off in the play as foolish and crude, and elevating in the woman to the statutes of clever sleuths, charged with defending one of their own against an unjustly oppressive, male-dominated world, the play inadvertently promotes that which it seeks to undermine. From reading and watching both versions of the play, the viewer can tell that the quilt was sewn during a time of unsteadiness. The stitching has led me to conclude that it was sewn either soon before or shortly after the murder of her husband. Minnie was very nervous about what she has done or what she was about to do. If I was locked in a house with the same person for as many years as she was, I think I would have to kill someone too. During times of escalated rage, people tend to shake uncontrollably until the adrenaline of the anger wears off. The quote from the play depicts when Miss Hale and Miss Peters find the quilt and restitch it to create less criminating evidence. And look at this! It's all over the place. Why, it looks as if she didn't know what she was about. There were two items in the house that caught my attention: the fire and its coals, and the last jar of cherry preserves. The fire had some ashes that you could tell had been going recently. I believe that the fire could be assumed to Minnie and John's relationship before everything had gone down. It's obvious that the entire scenario didn't happen all of a sudden, and definitely not in one night. But the fire had many coals which could relate to the many years that they were married. One day, the fire between them two just happened to go out, and that's when it all started to fall apart. I also wanted to mention that after the fire went out, the house dropped to freezing temperatures, which would have caused the glass preserves to break. There was only one jar left, and Miss Hale and Miss Peters decided that they were going to give it to Minnie. This jar signifies the last hope that Minnie might have, and due to the fact that these two ladies found it and kept it safe, represents that maybe Minnie has a chance for a new beginning, or even just to simply escape being charged with the murder of her husband. In conclusion, many small items in the Wright house indicated troublesome pasts and hopeful futures. While the bird in its cage symbolized Minnie in her attempts to be freed from her husband, the other items in the house were more than what showed on the surface. For example, the quilt is a representation of Minnie's mental stability. The rope is an extension of the struggle of women's rights during the 1900s. The canary is Minnie in some way, form, or other version. In the end, Miss Glassbell formed this play to raise awareness of the male-dominated society and how little of an influence that the intuitive woman of the world had on the future at that time. Instead of coming straight out and saying what she intended for the film, she let the audience watch it, which in the end made the audience absorb her viewpoint instead of instantly rejecting it. I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope that it gave you a different perspective on the entire story.